Hello and welcome to this week's Stonemaier Games livecast. I am Jamie Stegmaier as usual, and today is May 20th. As usual, I'm happy to answer any questions that you have about Stonemaier Games, about me, about my cats, about about pretty much anything you want. I'm happy to answer your questions. I also have some small Stonemaier Games news and topics to discuss, and just a bunch of random topics that related to kind of the videos that we posted over the past week and blog topics and things like that. I'll start off, as I often do, with today's chocolate of the day, because I have really been enjoying these truffles. These were originally in a Yum box that we received. We get this monthly box called Universal Yums. It's a treat box from a different country, and we discovered these truffles in one of those boxes, and I had to buy a full container because they are so delicious. I have to limit myself to two a day, because they are not healthy, but they are really, really good. Serving size is 3 truffles, but I stick with 2. This is my chocolate of the day. What is your treat of the day? The treat that you've already eaten or the treat that you're looking forward to enjoying today? Uh, Today I might be a little off. I had a terrible headache last night. I don't know why. I used to get migraines quite often, and I don't get them all that often anymore. But I woke up with one around like 3 a.m. last night and just had a terrible night of sleep. And took some ibuprofen. Uh, I'm sure it's just a migraine. I'm sure it'll go away, but I might be a little slow, a little bit off today. But I'm happy to be here with you and happy to yeah, discuss whatever we want to talk about today. Um, Behind me here, I have some new games I wanted to show you that I received recently. One I mentioned on last week's livecast. These are kind of on my to play soon pile. One is this 2-player game called The Seals of Cthulhu. I'm looking forward to trying that. I believe these are all Kickstarter games. From friend and peer in the industry, Gil Hova, is High Rise. Got this in the mail just the other day, and I'm really looking forward to this because I believe it has one of my favorite mechanisms in games, which is a one-way worker placement track, basically, like in Tokaido, where one way it's kind of uses time as a resource, um, where you're trying to advance on a track, or you get to choose how far on a track you want to advance, but in doing so, you give up all the spaces behind you. I think that is really cool, and I look forward to trying that in High Rise. And then the third game is, oh yeah, from some other designer friends, Matthew and Ben, the guys that behind Between Two Cities and Between Two Castles, is The Search for Planet X. I am very curious about this one. Deduction games are hit and miss for me, so I'm hoping this will be not a miss, a hit. And I'm sure Matthew and Ben pulled it off. It's a beautiful looking production. Obviously, I haven't even opened any of these games, but I'm looking forward to digging into them. What's on your to-play pile in the near future? Curious what you all are looking forward to. Maybe some recent Kickstarter games or other games that you bought from companies like mine or other companies. Let me know what's on your plot in your pile. Jono says, did the Iranian company ever stop publishing Wingspan? So Jono, what we ended up doing, so Jono's referring to a counterfeit situation that we encountered a couple weeks ago, where we learned that a company in Iran called Hazar2 had decided completely independently of us and definitely without our permission to reproduce Wingspan in Farsi. Um, and they were starting to promote it, and that's when I found out about it because I work directly with all of our international partners, and I had never even heard of this company. And what we ended up doing, it's very tough for us to kind of prosecute something like that in Iran in particular. But what we ended up doing is we found, there's someone that reached out to me, an Iranian lawyer who reached out to me, someone who was very active in the board game community. And what we ended up doing is I filmed a video addressing the Iranian board game community, just asking them not to support this counterfeit product. I understand that they want to play Wingspan in Iran. I want to bring our games to people worldwide, but not in that form, not in the counterfeit form. And so we posted this video. It went out to to the entire Iranian board game community, thanks to this ally that we had in Iran. And uh, and I say ally loosely. In the U.S., there are laws preventing us from actually working with someone in Iran or working with any company in Iran. Unfortunately, I think that's unfortunate, but that is the current state. And so this is just essentially a favor that anyone could have done for us, and this person volunteered to do for us. And retailers and distributors in Iran have basically banded together and agreed not to carry this game, this counterfeit version of the game. Um, I feel bad for the company. I know this company put a lot of hard work and effort into creating this game. They just did it the wrong way. They did it um, as a by stealing the intellectual property instead of getting the actual license from us, which is really unfortunate. But that's how we dealt with it. That's how we're dealing with it, and hopefully it will greatly discourage this company and other companies in Iran and elsewhere from counterfeiting. Chris is eating. He's cooking stuffed bacon wrapped jalapenos tonight. Oh, that'll be good. Christopher says, what are my thoughts on offering two types of games? Games with miniatures for plastic heads and a cheaper standee version. Um, yeah, so that's an interesting question. So I think it depends a lot on the game. Because it can greatly impact the cost of the game to have standees versus miniatures. And so I think it depends on your goal. Like if you believe a game has two very divergent audiences that it can reach, that it needs to reach to be successful, an audience that maybe wants a less expensive retail version of the game and a more expensive deluxe version of the game, um, by all means, I think that's a good reason to have two different versions of the game, but potentially with miniatures being the difference. There can be other differences too. But if you really only have one core audience, I think your job is almost to figure out what that core audience or what most people in that core audience wants or want. I think there's always going to be a small number of people that want something different. And that's okay. I think it's great that they can express their opinions. But a small number of people isn't usually enough to justify a special print run or a special component for a game. One other option, I think that, again, depending on the game, is that you can offer a game just with standees, like the cheaper version of the game. And then later on, if you find that a lot of people are asking for a deluxe component, if the game is maybe very successful, then you can offer an add-on directly from your website or through distributors, an add-on for the miniatures. I think one company that's done this fairly successfully is Mind Clash Games with Anachrony. Because Anachrony, you can buy these special miniatures directly from them, but you don't need them to play the game. Oh, Christoph also says, have I shared my thoughts on Dark Age and Iron Gold? So these are the fourth and fifth books in the Red Rising series that I love, that I've talked about quite a bit. And I've written about them on my blog, Christopher. I don't think I've discussed them here, but in short, I really enjoyed them. I think Pierce is continuing to evolve as a writer, and I'm really impressed with the overarching story and how he was able to jump forward in time after the original trilogy. I'm looking forward to book 6. Jake says, do I have any plans to produce any more family-friendly games like My Little Scythe? Ideally, most of our games would be construed as family-friendly. When I think of My Little Scythe, I think of a game that is almost directly geared towards parents playing with their kids. But I kind of think of that with all of our games. I think Between Two Castles works well for parents wanting to play with kids. I think, depending on the ages, some of our other games work as well. Between Two Cities definitely works. Um, and so in that vein, yes. In the vein of My Little Scythe being almost marketed a little bit more to kids and having the kids ask, okay, I want this, I want to play this with my parents. I don't know if that's something that will really target, because 8, 9, and 10-year-olds aren't the ones spending money on games. Um, I know that's kind of a callous businessy response to it, but I mean, we're marketing to people who actually can spend money on our games. I think that's the point of it. So I don't know if that'll be a major motivator there, and that may not even be a great reason, because I know parents buy stuff for their kids a lot because parents ask for it. But it's just, I don't know, it's just not a major focus. I don't have kids, so I'm not actively designing games for the sake for playing with kids. I'm just trying to create fun games that anyone can play together. Foxbat says, what are my thoughts on Feudum? Honestly, I've only ever played Feudum once, and it was a version that I played with the designer, very nice guy, Mark, very nice guy, that I played before the game was published, and I had a good time with it. It was a lot to take in. I mean, there's a lot of stuff, a lot of interconnected systems in Feudum, and I admire Mark for following his vision for the game. It isn't something. It's one of those games that takes a long time to teach and to learn. and to immerse yourself into. But I think if you're a really heavy gamer and you love that immersion and you want to go deep in a game, and maybe you don't have to teach it very often, you play with the same people, I think it can be a really nice experience for heavy gamers in particular. Carol says, and I'll jump over. Well, I'll keep going for questions in a minute. Then I'll jump over to my topics. I don't have anything really Stonemaier geared. I mean, I have been working on two different game designs recently that I'm really excited about, but they're not nearly far enough along for me to talk about. And we've mostly been copy editing the Wingspan Oceania expansion. So there's your weekly update on that. We are in the copy editing stage right now, making sure everything is ready before we actually go ahead and typeset it. Carol says she saw a post this week about me discussing playtesting on Tabletop Simulator not being ideal. Yeah, so my blog post earlier this week was on Monday was about the impact of the coronavirus on Stonemaier games. How some things are impacting us in a few things are impacting us in kind of good ways. Most of the ways are bad or a little bit frustrating, and some are just kind of neutral or not really having an impact on us. Check out that article on the Stonemaier Games website if you want. But Kara mentions one thing that playtesting has been pretty frustrating because I really miss local playtesting. Sitting down at a table playing with actual tactile components compared to Tabletopia or Tabletop Simulator, which are amazing platforms, but are just like in real life, you don't have to zoom in on something, or you don't have to like shift your position around the table using several different mouse clicks and hotkeys to do that. It's so much more streamlined in real life. Carol says, have I found advantages? Yeah, the advantages are that, especially right now, that we can play on Tabletop Simulator or Tabletopia with anyone in the world. So that is nice. You can have a local play test with anyone in the world. That is a nice perk. But it's just like we were playtesting the potential Viticulture expansion a couple weeks ago. And Viticulture is not a game that takes me a long time to play, like maybe 90 minutes. And we played, I think, 2 rounds each, 2 years each. Or 2 years total, in around 90 minutes on Tabletop Simulator, just because it's that much longer to do all the little fiddly things that you have to do online. But they're still cool platforms. It's just a lot more frustrating for me than local playtesting. That reminds me too, before I forget, I was on yesterday was kind of a day of live casting. I was on the Board Game Geek TV Twitch channel, which I think will eventually be put up on YouTube, playing the latest version of Rolling Realms, version 10. We had a lot of fun with it. And there's also, thanks to one of our copy editors, actually, again, named Justin Dwyer, he created a digital version of Rolling Realms, kind of an online form version that you can use now. It doesn't calculate anything for you, but it's easy to like check off boxes and enter numbers. So if you ever want to play Rolling Realms, it's on our website in digital form now. You don't even have to print it out. And I was also on the Dice Tower kind of live chat with Mike DeLisio last night at a nighttime appearance for just a live chat. And that was really neat, just to talk to people like you, but some people I think that aren't available to show up for this live cast showed up and asked us a bunch of fun questions. And it was fun to hear Mike's thoughts as well. That is up on YouTube now on the Dice Tower channel. So if you want to hear that live chat, it's an hour long. You can probably watch it on high speed and check it out on YouTube. David says he's new to the stream. David, thank you for joining us. He says he keeps designing first prototypes for games that he find out are very similar to existing games. And then he loses some of the momentum. I can definitely relate to that, David. David says, do I run into similar issues, and at what point do you abandon an idea because it's not unique enough versus keeping pushing through and assuming it will naturally evolve to be unique during later development? Yeah, that's an excellent question, David. For me, I mean, this is actually one of the reasons that other than my love of the hobby and the industry and my job, that I do immerse myself really, really deep into board game media on a daily basis. I spend quite a bit of time reading board game news, reading about games, learning about games, reading and watching and listening to reviews, because I want to prevent this from happening. Well, partially is because I want to be inspired, and I am constantly inspired by other designers. But also partially because I want to avoid that situation where I spend a lot of time designing a game and then find out, oh, that exact game already exists. One way that you can avoid that, David, as a newer designer, is just to talk openly and often about your designs so that people can say, oh, David, you are designing Marvel Legendary right now. That game already exists, things like that. So I think that is something you can avoid by talking about games early. But I think there is still value in pushing through and finding ways to innovate because a lot of my games, I think, in a lot of games from many designers, are inspired by at least a mechanism, or maybe even just a small mechanism in another game, and taking that mechanism and doing something new with it and innovating with it. So as long as doesn't end up being like very similar, I think it might be worth continuing and learning. The other thing too is I think it's good that you are willing to compare your game to other games because I I don't think we I think it's good for you for any designer to say, oh, this game already exists very similar in a better form than the thing that I'm creating. So I'm going to learn from this experience of designing this game, but I'm not going to put it out there for the world because it's already out there. People can already get it. I want to do something new. I think that is a great spirit to have as a game designer in the game industry today. Blake Leafy has a shameless plug, but I think it's worth doing. He has his magazine is on Kickstarter right now, and he posted a link there. Uh, you're more than welcome to share that, Blake, and anyone's welcome to check that out. Just scrolling down real quick, and actually, some of you are noting things that are making me think of other things that I need to do. So I'm going to make a quick note here. Ben says, "Why do I think there aren't a lot of game themes set in Southeast Asia?" That's an interesting question, Ben. Like I did my video this past week was about my top 10 favorite games with Japanese themes. Japan is a theme that's very close to me, and I wonder Ben, if one reason is that like I think of Japanese themes. One of the reasons that I love the Japanese culture, the Japanese themes, is that I studied the language from seventh grade on. Um, but and oddly enough, like Japanese and Chinese are languages that are often offered in schools in the U.S., but not other languages in Southeast Asia. Um, and so I wonder if that is a deterrent that from a very young age we are exposed to certain languages and certain cultures because of education, because of the education system, at least in the U.S. I'm talking from the U.S. perspective, but not those other languages. And so um, we the interest from a young age in those cultures isn't necessarily as prevalent as Chinese and Japanese, for example. That's just a random theory. I don't know. That might be true. Feel free to speak up in the comments if you share that experience, if your schools offer Chinese and or Japanese, and if they did or didn't offer other languages in Southeast Asia. Christopher says, would I ever produce a semi-Euro, more thematic a la War of the Ring Red Rising game? Um, I don't know. I mean, I would love to make a Red Rising game someday, um, if that becomes an option. I don't know a semi-Euro more thematic a la War of the Ring. I don't know. I don't know. I think it would just have to be the best uh, game fit for that world. So I hypothetically speaking, possibly, but I don't know. Brad says, "What? When can we expect the Scythe complete rulebook?" Yeah. Um, Thanks for your question about that, Brad. We are in production for it now, and actually probably shouldn't be all that long of a production because it's a fairly simple product to make, given that it's just paper and spiral binding. So it probably looking at 3 or 4 months away for production and freight shipping. Yeah. Ephraim says, "What is Megan's favorite game?" Yeah, Megan and I have talked about doing a top 10 list of her games, but she loves games, but I don't think she thinks of them in terms of like top 10 from that top 10 perspective. A few of the games that came up when she and I recently talked about it, I'll just mention these real quick. She loves Quacks of Quedlinburg. She loves Clank, Star Realms, Rogers of the Ganges, Mysterium, Dominion, Space Base, Isle of Cats, and Cartographers. I don't know if any of those would actually make her top 10, but those are games that she really enjoys. Orkin says, what has been the biggest positive surprise resulting from the decision for Stonemaier Games to publish games by other designers? Yeah, it started with Between Two Cities. Wingspan, obviously, is a big one. Between Two Castles is another one. And My Little Scythe. The biggest positive surprise. I don't know, it's just fun for me personally, to be able to work with other designers in that way. It also, I think it makes my company feel maybe not legitimate isn't really the right word, but uh, less of a vanity publisher because if we only publish games that I designed, it's kind of it feels a little bit like a vanity publisher. Um, I don't know, it just feels like a more robust, real company because we publish designs from other designers other than just me. I don't know if that was necessarily a positive surprise, but maybe the biggest positive surprise is that I've gotten to work with some wonderful people. The designers of those games, some of my co-designers for expansions. It's just been a neat way to connect with people that I wouldn't have otherwise connected with. Adrian says, "What would motivate you to design a two-player only game?" I, um, I don't. I honestly don't know if it would happen. I think that would have to be just a fun side project, and I don't really have time for fun side projects. I have time for fun main projects because we don't publish games that play less than 5 players. But I do get to essentially design, like every game that I design is also a two-player game, and so I get to design a lot of games that are fun at 2 players. Um, and a lot of the playtesting, the early playtesting is often with just 2 or 3 players. So I get to have that experience of playing that way. But Adrian, yeah, it just isn't part of our company's core philosophy. We want games that can play as few as 2 players, but also can scale up to a bigger game night. Zach says, "What celebrities outside of the board gaming community would I like to sit down and have a conversation with?" Um, yeah, sit down and have a conversation with. That's an interesting question. Outside of the board game community. Um, who do I think would be really interesting? I was just thinking the other day, there was some like celebrity that I thought, oh, this person is actually just a really nice person. I would have a good time talking to him or her. I often the types of people that come to mind are like movie stars because they're uh, maybe seen as celebrities more than other types of celebrities. But there's also sports stars. I'd love to, I don't know, play soccer with some of my favorite soccer players in the world. That would be awesome. I don't know, one fun one that comes to mind is Will Ferrell. I don't know if I'd have a great conversation with Will, but I'm sure he would, like, he always makes me laugh, and so I'd have a great time talking with him. Um, or just, I would almost rather be like part of a bigger group, just hanging out, watching a bunch of funny, very funny people interact with each other. I think that would be a lot of fun. They don't even have to be celebrities, too. There are plenty of non-celebrity, hilarious people. Ephraim says, "Am I open to doing what Restoration Games is doing, reviving older games and making them better?" I guess I'm open to it, but I think Restoration is doing it so well, and they're making that such a big part, or that is their brand, that I'm happy for them to do it, and happy for me to enjoy the games that they do as a gamer. I guess an instance of that happening would be if I discovered an older game that I thought was amazing, and no one was doing anything with it. I might revive it, or I might just learn. Like I don't know. I learned from so many different mechanisms from other designers, other publishers, but I rarely want to do what they've already done with those mechanisms. I want to do something new with them. So I might be inspired by an older mechanism, but I don't know if I would really do what Restoration Games is doing and just update the game. I don't mean to downplay that at all. I absolutely love what they do. Downforce is one of my favorite games. Um, and I wouldn't even know about that game if they hadn't remade it. And also, Key to the Kingdom was a game that I really enjoyed as a kid, and I've heard that they're thinking about making a restored version of it. That I will definitely get because I just had a blast with that as a kid. Ronak says, "What are my views on the Gen Con cancellation?" Um, and I'll throw in Essen in there too. It wasn't part of the question, but Essen and Gen Con cancellations and online conventions. Yeah, I mostly, I mean, it doesn't have a huge impact on some of our games. It does impact our one of our partners, Meeple Source, because they kind of represent my company at Gen Con every year. It does impact them, but mostly I feel for other publishers that depend pretty heavily on conventions and the big conventions for their sales and their revenue and their exposure and marketing. And so I think they were probably hurting by that announcement, but I think they probably also knew it was coming. As for online conventions, I don't think they can come close to replacing the experience of a real in-person convention. But I love that people are innovating right now and finding ways to connect with other gamers and connect with people they love in this hobby in ways that don't involve person-to-person contact. So I'm all for online conventions in that way. Adam has a similar question. He says, "Yeah, I shared my impact recently on COVID-19 and Stonemaier Games. What are my thoughts on how it will impact the board game industry as a whole?" That's a lot harder to say because I can often speak to my experience. It's a lot harder for me to speak to the experience of everyone in the community. I think some of the things that I mentioned in that blog post do apply to other companies. Um, Overall theory is that I suspect that right now the coronavirus is actually doing decently well for board game sales because people are not going out to all the forms of entertainment that people leave their homes for. They're staying in their homes and finding forms of entertainment for in their homes, and board games are fantastic for that. I think in the long run, depending on how long this continues, and how long it has an impact on people's budgets, I think anything that is not essential, no matter how entertaining it is, will take a hit. And I think the board game industry is solidly in that category of a wonderful thing, but you don't need a board game to survive. You don't need board games to survive. And so I think if people's budgets get really tight, board games will be one of the things that they eventually cut. It just depends on how long it goes on, I think, and how long it has an impact on the local, regional, and world economies. That's my off-the-cuff theory. David says, do I have any favorite tricks or techniques that you often use to get past a stuck point in the design? He suggests like shelving the idea for a while, split it up into smaller pieces. David, again, I love the way that you're thinking about game design here. This is awesome. For me, I often just put it aside for a while. This is one of the reasons that I like to work on 2 games at a time, because I can switch back and forth depending on what I'm more excited to work on that day or that week. And often putting a game aside, even for a couple days, lets me come back fresh to it with a fresh set of eyes. And also, it also helps me just to continue to play a lot of other games. I've often found that that gets me out of a rut, where if I'm stuck on a certain mechanism in a certain game, say it's a worker placement game, and then I go and spend a couple days playing worker placement games, and maybe watching some videos about worker placement games, then those will give me ideas for getting out of that rut that I was experiencing with my game design. Zach says, what were my thoughts on the Survivor finale? Yeah, the Survivor finale was last week. Uh, I guess spoiler warning. I won't mention who won or anything like that, but I, I really did enjoy the finale. I enjoyed the whole season, and I am happy with the person who won. Um, Zach says, did I like the fire token currency system they tried? Overall, yes. I like the idea of it. I like that it gave the people in exile a way to interact with the people and still kind of participate in the game, even though they were on exile. The one thing that I hope, and I hope that they change in the future, is that they're very clear up front with the survivors as to what the tokens can be spent on. I don't think they should leave it as something uncertain for them to discover later, because if they do, they will hang on to those tokens. They will not spend them. And I think it's a lot more interesting if we see the survivors actively spending tokens on things that they value at any given time, rather than holding off for an uncertain thing in the future. Um, so I think that's a little gamification technique that they can tweak a little bit and have a really good system going forward, in my opinion. I have some more questions here. Let me jump over to my topics, see if I have anything urgent. I really don't have anything all that urgent. Some games I played recently. We replayed through the Shards of Infinity Shadow of Salvation campaign. If you're looking for a campaign game, and an inexpensive one at that, I highly suggest getting Shards of Infinity. It's a little deck building game, and the Shadow of Salvation campaign. It's a cooperative campaign. Awesome. We also played Codenames Online. I played a few games of Terra Mystica online recently on Board Game Arena, and Russian Railroads on Board Game Arena. Uh, yeah, I have a few other random topics, but nothing, not even about board games. Ronak says, have I played all of the Spiel des Jahres nominated games? Which is my favorite? Let's see. I want to play The Crew. I haven't played The Crew yet, but I want to play that. I've played Cartographers. I absolutely love it, and I love that that was nominated. That was awesome. That I was surprised that they. I wasn't surprised that it made the list, but it was like, oh, this is a game that I really love that made the list. Oftentimes there are random games I've never even heard of that make the list, but Cartographers made it, which is fantastic. Um, that's probably the one that I'm most excited about, and I think those might be the only two that I really knew much about. I'm missing a third game. Here, I'll try to pull it up real quick. This is the Big Gaming Award, for those of you who aren't familiar with that term. Nominees, let's see. King's Dilemma. Okay, King's Dilemma is one that I really want to play. I definitely have heard of that. I want to play, but I have not played it. Ever since Shut Up and Sit Down talked about it, I haven't been able to get a copy anywhere. But I would like to play that someday. Ali says, was Scythe designed to be played competitively? Well, it is a competitive game. Yeah, it's not a cooperative game, so absolutely yes in that way. If you're asking was it designed for tournament play, no. Um, Not, no, definitely not. I did try to balance it as much as possible because I want it to be, if there are big balance issues, then people aren't going to have fun with it, even at the tabletop, or some people won't have fun with it. But for tournament play, I think you need a game that is um, perfectly balanced, 100% balanced, and can't give any advantage to one player over another. And Scythe is not that. I don't think any of our games are to that point. And I say that a little bit because we did run a Euphoria tournament very early on in my company's growth, and it felt a little weird. Both I think slightly because of the balance, and also because players were approaching the game from a very competitive perspective rather than the perspective of just having fun. And I think you can just have fun and also be competitive. But when you're in it just for the sake of winning it and winning the tournament and winning money, we were offering money for that tournament. People change a little bit, and so our games aren't really designed for that format. Steven says, have all the requests for uh, including the bin chicken in the Wingspan Oceania paid off? I don't know if all of them have, but I know Elizabeth absorbed all of the requests and considered them for the Wingspan Oceania expansion. Rob says, I've noticed Panda is the printer for a good number of popular games, all with higher quality components. Is this because they only do more expensive jobs? Um, yeah, Panda. I think Panda's just made a great name for themselves for being both making great components and also being great with communication. They have a great team of project managers that are really great communicators, which is something that you don't always get when you're working with really any other company. But I think Panda does that exceptionally well, and that's why you see them being the manufacturer for a lot of games. Um, Rafal says, I'm going to make another note here. Are Viticulture and Wingspan coming out on iOS or Steam only? Um, yeah, not Steam only. No, I think Viticulture. I think both are coming out on a variety of platforms. I can never. We have so many digital projects in the works that I can't ever remember exactly which platforms they're coming out on. But I think that the initial approach for most of them is iOS, Android, and Steam. Ideally, all three of those right from the bat, from the beginning. But I don't know about the specific games. Zach says, does Stonemaier Games plan on being involved with any of the online conventions that a lot of cons seem to be trying out this year? Maybe not. I mean, part of what I've been invited to like speak at a few of them, but the thing is, if I'm going to spend my time um, speaking or being involved in a convention in that way, I want it to be available to the public, not necessarily in the short term, but in the long term. So if I say I give a talk or I'm on a panel or something, I don't want that panel to be exclusive to a few people that attend it. I'd rather if I'm going to spend my time on it, I want it to be available to anyone who might be interested in that. So that's kind of where I've drawn the line so far with some invitations where people have invited me to participate. I want it to be open to not the public necessarily right off in the bat, but eventually it would be available on YouTube or something like that. I know that's just one like little part of these conventions, but that's been something that I've been thinking about lately. Uh, Brian says, in Rolling Realms, the new scythe, you can cross off. This is a very specific question, Brian, but I'll try to answer it. In the new scythe, you can cross off a top row number for a bonus, or you can cross off a bottom row number and pay the cost to gain a star. Or you can do as Brian said here, you can cross off a top row number for a bonus, and if you have the resource for the bottom row, the corresponding bottom row benefit, you can cross off the bottom row, regardless of the die number there, and gain a star. Um, yeah, I think that answers your question, Brian. Stephen played his 50th game of Scythe on the weekend. That's awesome. 50 games of Scythe. That's really cool, Stephen. That's great to hear. Thanks for playing so many times. You went deep on it. Veli Veli says, why do I think sport games are not as big as other games? I have a whole video about this, Veli Veli. I don't know if anyone can find it off the cuff. If Cody is here, Cody's often good at finding my video links uh, on sports themed games. Um, trying to remember what my theory was about it. I think my video was kind of me like stumbling through it and kind of pointing out that they just don't seem to work. I think people uh, who love sports would rather either play them or watch them on TV rather than trying to simulate them in a game form, and they don't seem to for the most part appeal to gamers. I think there are some exceptions, and I think the biggest exception are racing games. I think racing games do translate really well to the board game format, whereas other sports themed games don't translate as well, or don't get people excited about them. Stefan says, did I consider doing a more combat heavy game? Um, Probably not. It's just not the type of game that I pursue. Scythe is probably the most combat heavy game that I would publish. And as you know, Scythe is not a particularly combat heavy game. I see plenty of other questions. I'm loving these questions. Let me just finish off my topics real quick because they're not really a big deal today. We watched a movie this weekend called Upgrade. That was pretty good. A little gory, but had some nice twists and turns, some fun action. And we also cooked a lot last week. We tried out the Purple Carrot subscription service and had a great experience with it where I cooked with tempeh for the first time. I cooked with jackfruit. I've eaten jackfruit, but we made jackfruit barbecue sandwiches, which were awesome. And we made a chickpea dish that was really, really good with a little bit of lime zest in it. I think it had dill and lime zest, and that was awesome. Uh, so we had a fun time cooking some delicious vegetarian meals last week. Jason, first time commenter. Thanks for joining here, Jason, for the first time. He says, with an added focus on solo and print and play games, how often do you explore the talent pool of print and play game designers with an eye on taking their designs to the next level? That's a great question, Jason. It isn't really something that like Rolling Realms emerged simply because I wanted to design something for the coronavirus and for people to connect during the coronavirus. Um, for solo, that's a good question. Solo is a part of our company because I want solo versions of our multiplayer games. So it isn't like we're seeking out one-player games. And I think maybe you're not referring to some of our games in particular, but I think we have seen other companies that are making solo-only games. That's just not something that Stonemaier Games does. We make games that play from 1 to 5 players, 1 to 6 players. Um, but I agree that there's a great pool of talent among designers that focus on print and play games. I think the one thing is for Stonemaier Games in particular, it rarely works for us because one of the requirements for games that we publish is that they need to have a special component hook. They need to have some component that gets people really, really excited about having that game on their table. And print and play games are almost designed around the idea that you don't have special components, that you just are using pencil and paper. And so that's a compromise that we're not really aiming to make with our games. And so it doesn't always work with Stonemaier Games. But I love that there is a great community behind those games, and that I hope other publishers who don't have the same restrictions that we do take notice of those designers. Al says that Tuscany Essential Edition often appears on lists about expansions that gamers recommend to improve the base game to the point that they wouldn't play the base game by itself anymore. When you're asked to play or teach Viticulture, do you also recommend that it's played with Tuscany? I always recommend playing Viticulture base game first. I think I'm speaking out of total bias here, but I think Viticulture by itself is perfectly fine. It just so happens that Tuscany is a pretty good expansion and it elevates the game. But I don't think that takes away from the experience of Viticulture itself. Um, so, uh, yeah, whenever I teach Viticulture, I always teach just the base game, and then I bring in Tuscany later. I think it's just the learning curve is a lot lower for Viticulture. Veli says, do I have a franchise that you would like to make a game out of, like an IP, an intellectual property? And the one that I often say is Red Rising, which was mentioned earlier in this podcast, or in this live cast. Red Rising is a book series that I absolutely love and that I have tried to design a game in and have not been successful in doing so. Eric says, in my opinion, how will the cancellation postponement of Gen Con, Origins, Essen, etc. impact how publishers market and sell their games this fall? For example, he mentions that Renegade is having its own virtual convention in June. Will that become a trend? Yeah, but it seems like this is kind of the topic of the day. People are very curious about online conventions. I didn't know that Renegade was having their own online convention. Um, I think it's neat that different publishers are trying different things. That they need to work. Then they need to find a way to have it work. So I applaud Renegade for doing that. I applaud other publishers for connecting with their audiences through conventions and online content. I don't know if it'll become a trend, but I think we'll certainly see and have already seen publishers spending their time reaching out virtually rather than in person with people because that isn't really possible right now. How will it impact how publishers market and sell their games? I think just in general, I think publishers that were convention dependent will have to find other ways to do so. Fortunately, there are many other ways to market your games beyond just conventions. Justin says that he just had a breakthrough on a game that he was stuck on and about to scrap. Did I have moments on any of my games where you thought it might not work out before having a eureka moment that saved it? I'm glad to hear that you had that moment, Justin. I've had it happen a few times, and I've had to scrap some games where I just didn't have that moment. But yeah, I've definitely had that moment. Well, for any of our games that we've published, I've had that moment at least once. Marcel says, I'm interested in how you work with graphic designers. Have you worked with designers, painters you've never actually physically met? Yes, most people I never actually meet that I work with. Um, I know like Christine is our graphic designer. I know Christine from college, but I haven't seen Christine in many years, and not since we started working together professionally. Morton, I've only met because he came to the U.S. for a convention. Morton's the guy that runs Automa, who creates the solo versions of our games. Jakob, I think was watching for a little bit here. Jakob is the world creator and illustrator of Scythe. I've never met Jakob, never even talked to Jakob. We've only talked over email. So I work virtually with pretty much everyone that I work with. Yeah. Al says, are there any games that you enjoy playing but avoid playing for any reason, such as the tension or conflict it may create within a social group? Ooh, that's interesting. Um, Yeah, definitely. I'm trying to think of any examples off the top of my head, but yeah, there are certain games that maybe just don't create. Well, I love the mechanisms that they may not create a positive atmosphere in the group. Um, and I have friends that do this too. I can't think of an example for myself right off the top of my head. Actually, no. One that has happened with is Sheriff of Nottingham, which is a game that balances on that line very, very closely. It's a really fun game. I love Sheriff of Nottingham, but it has had moments that feel like true betrayal, whether I was the betrayer or someone else was the betrayer, and that has created not tension so much, but uh, a bad feeling to the point that some people that I played that with, or that I've seen people play, have just decided, I don't want to have that feeling anymore. As much as I enjoy a lot of this game, I don't want to have that feeling with my friends anymore, and so it hasn't got back to the table. I haven't played it in a couple of years now, and I think partially because of that. Betsy says, what is my approach to designing brand new mechanisms? And I think the second part of your sentence was cut. Oh, here we go. Betsy says, what is my approach to designing brand new mechanisms, modifying an existing mechanism, or deliberately trying to come up with something totally new? I think it is tough to come up with like an overarching mechanism, like the core mechanism of game. I think that is very tough to do. There are very few completely new mechanisms that are the core of the game that are created. However, I think innovating within those mechanisms or having like little mechanisms that are just a little bit different than a little different or a little new, that emerges for me from the beginning from brainstorming, because I'm always trying to brainstorm something that doesn't already exist that is innovative. I go into it with an innovative lens, and also through playtesting and seeing as we're playtesting, like I might see, oh, this is just the same as another mechanism in another game. I need to innovate that. Or through playtesting, I see that something would just work better in a different way. I often just stumble upon those things during playtesting to see how players are interacting and with the game and seeing how things evolve. So part of it is brainstorming and going in with an innovative lens. Part of it is through playtesting. George says, what if I had to choose between cartographers and on tour? Which one is closer to my heart? Yeah, I struggled with that on my, I think I did a list where the two were right near the top of the list. Um, I think right now I'd have to go with cartographers. Yeah. Timmy says, have I ever had ideas such as different mechanisms that I was really excited about incorporating into one of my games, but had to discard them for the sole reason they could not work with all ranges of player counts? Yeah, definitely. Yeah. Um, that has happened. Yeah, I can't think of anything specific right now, but it has definitely happened where a certain mechanism just does not scale up or it doesn't scale down, and I have to move on from it. And I think that's actually a good thing. It's good to have some restrictions as the designer, um, because then I think with no restrictions at all, including from my perspective as a publisher, budgetary restrictions, there are almost too many possibilities, too many options, and it can be tough to move forward with any design if everything is an option. Rachel says, here's a fun, silly question. Have I ever played the Cones of Dunshire? How was it? So I've come close to playing it. I was at Gen Con like maybe 4 or 5 years ago when they hosted a playthrough of a giant-sized version of Cones of Dunshire. It was outside. We kind of stumbled upon it and watched from a distance. So we didn't have tickets. We weren't really up close to it. But from a distance, we saw it being played, and or saw it trying to be played. Even the people that were organizing the event really struggled with the rules of the game, and so they didn't get very far in it. I think we hung out for like a couple of hours, just hanging out, eating dinner, and kind of paying attention to it. And they got through maybe a turn or two. They really struggled to play it, but it was fun for them to try to give them to see if they could just try to play it. Simon says, I was wondering what your views on inserts are. Do I use them, and if so, do I have a preferred type? For our, I mean, I'm from the publisher perspective. I like to have inserts that organize games well if it's necessary. I don't think it's always really all that necessary to have a beautiful, perfect insert if you just have maybe a stack of cards and a few packets of components. That may not be necessary. In other games, like I think My Little Scythe, I think having an insert really elevates the game to have a really fancy insert from game trays. In Tapestry, I think it's nice to have all the miniatures in an insert rather than in a big plastic bag. But Simon, if you're talking about like custom inserts, like from Broken Token, um, I don't think I've ever bought one of those inserts. I love that there are companies that make them, and I love that there are people who want them, but I'm not one that pursues those types of inserts. Patrick says, hello from Slovenia. I think that you might be one of the first people that have joined us from Slovenia, Patrick. When do I think Wingspan Oceania will be available? Right now, we're still targeting the end of 2020. We're near the end of actually like creating it, but producing it and manufacturing it and shipping it takes a long time. So we're looking at the end of 2020. It could bump into 2021, but as of now, I think we're probably looking at holiday season 2020. Daniel says, do I need more playtesters for higher play counts? He says Sweden has less strict rules on social distancing, so 3 to 4 player games, for example, are not out of the question. Daniel, thank you for asking that. And that's good to know about Sweden. Uh, right now, I think we're doing okay, but if we need other blind playtesters, it's good to know there's some options out there, and that Sweden maybe is a country that we should target a little bit if we need higher player counts. And also, Daniel kind of reminded me, unintentionally, I think, that I did a blog post that was somewhat controversial on Friday about using a certain filter for determining if someone who is interested in working with Stonemaier games is someone who is self-sufficient and takes initiative well. It was a blog post where basically someone reached out to me and wanted to be considered as an artist for Stonemaier games. And I said, awesome, yeah, I think your art looks great. Just go to our website and this is all over Instagram, over message on Instagram. And I said, check out our website and just fill out the job application there. That's where we consolidate information about illustrators. And the person wrote back to me and said, can you send me a link? Can you send me the URL? Which is a very small request. It's very easy for me, or not easy over Instagram, but if I'm on my computer, it's pretty easy for me to find that link and post it and send it to the person. But for a while now, I've had a slight bias when someone asks me to do that for them, because this is a person that was coming to me wanting to work for me and was immediately asking me to find something for them rather than them even trying to find the link and taking that initiative and having the self-sufficiency to find a fairly easy to find link. And so we had a great discussion about it in this blog post. If that's something that resonates to you or that you have a strong opinion about, you might check out Friday's blog post and respond to the poll about whether or not that question of asking me to provide the link for them instead of them trying to find the link is an indicator that they might not be the type of person who easily takes the initiative or is self-sufficient. It was an interesting topic to follow. Asaf says, do I think board game competitions are important for my marketing strategy? From ours, no. Board game competitions are not at all a part of our marketing strategy. Foxbat says, one of my Euphoria marker tiles got damaged and ripped by my toddler. Is there some way to replace it? Yeah, just go to our website and find the replacement parts form. There are a couple different ways you can find it, but if you look for Some of Our Games replacement parts, you will find it, and just tell us what you need replaced, and we'll take care of that. There's a form for it there. Oh, and Mackenzie already answered that question. Thank you, Mackenzie. Scott says, could there be some plans someday to scale up the size mechs into model sets like old school World War II models? That would be awesome, Scott, but that would be so incredibly expensive that I don't think we could possibly do that. Because even the metal mechs that we already make are incredibly expensive to make and produce and to sell. That the price of bigger versions would just be, it would be incredibly expensive. Thank you, Oregon, for finding some of these links that I mentioned about sports-themed games, and both Mackenzie and Pete provided the replacement parts form. You all are awesome for doing that. Kevin says, why did I not publish the new Mariposas by Elizabeth Hargrave? I think it's actually great. I mean, I love Elizabeth. I love other designers that we work with, Hobie, Ben, Matthew. They're all wonderful people, but I think it's great that they aren't stuck with just one publisher. I think it's great that they work with a variety of publishers and have a diverse portfolio to work with other publishers. So, I mean, we're not publishing Mariposas because Elizabeth wanted to publish it with AAG. I think that's a wonderful choice for her. We did look at the game fairly early on, and I enjoyed it. I wanted it to be a little bit heavier than it was. And when I offered that feedback to Elizabeth and offered some suggestions, I basically went to her and said, Elizabeth, I think we could publish this game. I think it could be very successful. I think it could be successful in its current form, but if it were Stonemaier Games, I think it needs to be a little bit heavier, and I'd like to add a little bit more progression to it, a few different elements to it. And I said, but do you want that? I said, Elizabeth, do you want that, or do you think the game thrives as a lighter game? And if so, I think it would be awesome if you worked with another publisher for it. And Elizabeth said, I think it thrives as a little bit of a lighter game. And so I think that was a wonderful choice for her and for the game and for AEG. And I think it's great that she is working with another publisher and not just sticking with one publisher. I think sometimes designers can get into a little bit of a rut if they only work with one publisher, and then they're solely dependent on that publisher. If that publisher messes up, goes out of business, they're a little stuck at that point. So I think it's great for our designers to have to work with a diverse array of other publishers. Mike says, as a publisher, am I considering joining Origins or Gen Con's online conventions? That's a good question. I'd have to look into more details about exactly what they're doing, but probably not. I think our outreach to people is already pretty good without needing to rely on conventions, whether they're online or in person. Unrelated follow-up, who is my favorite Plan B Games employee? It's you, Mike. Of course it's you. Jeffrey says, what is my favorite movie? For a long time, I would have said that my favorite movie was Fight Club. I really love Fight Club, but I haven't actually watched Fight Club in a long, long time, so I don't know if I can really count that as my favorite movie anymore. That was like my favorite movie in my 20s. That was a good like college age or post-collegiate favorite movie. Now I don't know if I really have one. Because I rarely watch movies more than once, and I think a favorite movie is one that I would want to watch over and over again. I don't necessarily have one. Do you have one, Jeffrey? Do you have a movie that you will never turn down from watching if it's on TV or if a friend wants to watch it? Oregon says, approximately when will you open up registration for Design Day 2020? We opened it up a few months ago. Yeah, it's actually already sold out. We have a limited space for it because we work with a local game cafe called Pieces here in St. Louis, and so we opened up registration a couple months ago, and it is sold out now. But for 2021, if you get on the sign up list for 2020, then you'll at least get a notification, an early notification for 2021. Raymond says, do I play My Little Scythe myself? I do, not by myself, but I do play from time to time with friends. Oh, and he said that Watch It Played. Rodney at Watch It Played just posted the video. Yeah, I was working with Rodney on that yesterday to get that together. I'm looking over my emails to see if he sent me a notification, but that is great to hear that the Watch It Play video for the Pie in the Sky expansion is now online. I really appreciate Rodney doing that. Yeah, Rodney, this is a paid service that Rodney does for publishers where we pay him to create these Watch It Play videos, and he does a wonderful job with them. Zach says, is there a game that you think has an interesting worker placement mechanism that you just find extremely thematic or satisfying? Um, yeah, well, one that comes to mind right off the bat in terms of both thematic and satisfying is Gugong. Gugong uses workers in a different way, where the workers are essentially the cards, where you are bribing a third-party entity on the board by taking a card that you have, and it has to be, or it's supposed to be higher value than the card that's on the board, and you replace it. So you bribe them with your card, and then you gain the card that was there. It's it's more like action selection than exactly worker placement because you're not placing a worker on that action, but you essentially are. I think that is a really, really clever thematic mechanism that I find very, very satisfying. Um, what's another one? What are some of my favorite worker placement games? Solkin. Solkin is another one. I love the worker placement in Solkin, especially given the time, the feeling of time, how that works with the theme and the mechanisms, the passage of time, how benefits get better the longer your workers hang out in that certain area. I think that's really great. And really, in Stonemaier games, I think I enjoy the bumping mechanism that we use in Charterstone and Euphoria. I think that's really satisfying, has a nice form of player interaction. And I love the bonuses in Viticulture and the Grande worker in Viticulture. I think both of those are fun little innovations for worker placement. Asaf says, what are my opinion on board game design competitions? Board game design competitions. I think I think they're a good motivator for people to actually pursue their game design dream. Um, it's something that we tried a long, long time ago and found that it didn't really work for us in terms of getting new content. It isn't a format that works well for us, but I love that it is a motivator for other game designers. Organ mentions Groundhog Day as a favorite movie. Groundhog Day, I agree, a wonderful movie. I love time loop movies in general. Steven says, how are things in St. Louis? He says, we usually visit around July 4th every year, and we're still unsure if we'll try to do that this year. The one good news about St. Louis, I think, is that the city acted very early with a stay-at-home order, well before the state, well before the country was even considering it, the president was considering it. So St. Louis City has seen a fairly low number of cases of the coronavirus and a very low number of deaths, fortunately. Um, I can't speak for how it will be on July 4th. I just know that right now they've done a pretty good job of it, and the stay-at-home order continues here, and I think will continue as long as it takes. Jeff says, what's my take on the future of conventions? Yeah, conventions are definitely the topic of the day. Do I have something in mind to reach to your customers? Yeah, I mean, well, the thing is, our entire strategy for reaching out to customers is not convention dependent. It's through videos like this. It's through our games. It's through the different content that we create for our games. It's different Facebook groups, our customer service. It's through all the things that we do to reach out to customers every day. So we are not convention dependent in that way. We attend very few conventions and don't really have it's just not a part of our marketing strategy. Um, the future of conventions, I think we will eventually return to a world where you can gather in large groups of people. And I think conventions will come back together and thrive in that environment as they have in the past. At least that is my hope. Yeah. Dave says, is Rolling Realms finished? I don't know exactly, Dave. This is something that I've been thinking about today after playing version 10 yesterday. I think the design of it is close to being finished, at least the initial 9 realms version of it. Uh, the question in my mind right now is, should I actually print it? Should I make it a printed game? And that I don't know. It definitely was not the intent behind the creation of it, but a number of people have kind of asked me to do that, and so if a lot of people want me to make a printed version of Rolling Realms, it's something that I would be happy to do. Al says, am I able to reveal any other submissions that didn't progress with Stonemaier games that got published elsewhere? I think Al might be referring to Anachrony as being one of the biggest named games that was originally submitted to us and got published elsewhere. And Mary Poses, actually. Maybe you weren't referring to Anachrony. Yeah, Anachrony was one. Mary Poses is another that was kind of submitted to us. Elizabeth kind of just maybe wanted to get our opinion on it. Um, any other big name games that didn't end up with us? I think those are the big two. Probably the big two right now. James says it seems impossible to get a hold of Wingspan, Viticulture, and Invaders from Afar in the UK at the moment. Well, James, you should go to our web store because we actually have Viticulture in stock in our fulfillment center in the UK because we have a fulfillment center in the UK. So anything you order in our web store will be shipped from the UK to anywhere in Europe. And I know we have Viticulture in stock. I know we have Invaders in stock. Wingspan, we don't. Actually, no, Wingspan, we do have it in stock in the UK. Yeah, we have all those things in stock. So go to our web store and get yourself a copy right now. Steven says, what games are behind you on the right? Oh, yeah, Steven, I talked about those earlier. There's Seals of Cthulhu, The Search for Planet X, and High Rise by Gil Hova. Philippe says, I've been very successful on Kickstarter in the past. Yeah, our last project was Scythe in 2015. Now I'm more of a customer, more of a backer. Definitely true. Have I backed something lately? What are my impressions on games like Tainted Grail and Hell? I haven't played Tainted Grail. Hell is very new. I'm curious to play Tainted Grail, but I didn't back it, don't own it. Have I backed something recently? Yeah, what's the most recent thing that I backed? Pull it up right now. I'm going to wind this down in a minute, but if you have any remaining questions, it'll go up on YouTube in the very near future. This video will, so feel free to post your questions there and I'll answer in the future. Kickstarter isn't loading for me right now, Philippe, so off the top of my head, what did I... Canvas was probably the most recent project that I backed. Canvas, I think it just successfully funded a couple days ago or yesterday. Justin here from the Room 51 podcast. He says he wants to get more into solo gaming, but I never really sit down to play one. Do I have any suggestions on where to start to get into that part of the hobby? Justin, I'm actually not much of a solo gamer myself, so I don't know if I have a great answer for that. For our games, I think Viticulture is the easiest solo experience to learn. The rest are very robust. They're a little bit more of a learning curve, but they are also just Scythe and Wingspan, the solo versions are very highly regarded. But if you want to try a solo version of our games, one of our games, I would start with Viticulture. There's also some great solo reviewers. Solosaurus, I think, is one of them. I don't know. People might have to answer that one in the comments. People who follow solo reviewers and have some thoughts about those. I know there are some great reviewers that focus specifically on solo games. You might get some recommendations for in the comments here. Oregon says, in some or any ways, do I regret not publishing Anachrony? No, because I think Mindclash did such a fantastic job with it. I think it thrived under their guidance. I don't think it would have thrived in the same way with us. I would have tried to make it simpler, and I think it thrives by being a more complex game. Brian has another Rolling Realm specific question. If you use the top number for a resource and pay the bottom resource for a star, do you cross off the bottom number? Yes, you do. You cross it off. Yeah. Jeffrey says, what is my current rock climbing grade? Well, right now, I haven't been able to rock climb in a few months now, so it's probably gone down. Where was I? I was starting to flirt with the 11s, but more solidly in like the 10s. I think I did maybe a 10C at one point. So like, yeah, in the 10s. Yeah, maybe not 11s yet. Let's see. Okay, I think I got to the end of the questions, which is great because I've got to run and do a quick errand right now. Quick errand. But thank you so much for joining me. I will put this up on YouTube so you can answer or ask other questions there. I'll be happy to answer there. And I will, yeah, I'll see you next Wednesday. Take care and have a great week.